When you think of an ancient human, you probably picture the same thing. A hunched figure, dragging knuckles, communicating in grunts, driven entirely by hunger and aggression. Something closer to an animal than a person. You pictured that, didn't you? It's fine. Most people do. And honestly, that image makes sense, given how ancient humans are usually portrayed. Big muscles, short tempers, zero sophistication. Not exactly the profile of someone running complex psychological systems. So the question is, if they could barely speak, if they had no books, no schools, no institutions, no written language of any kind, how could they possibly be psychologically intelligent? The answer is that they were not just psychologically intelligent. In several specific and measurable ways, ancient humans were operating at a cognitive level that modern humans genuinely cannot match. There are 6 psychological tricks they used to survive in one of the most hostile environments any species has ever navigated. And understanding them changes everything about how you see the ancient human mind. Trick number 1, the negativity bias, or how ancient humans turned pessimism into their most powerful survival tool. The ancient human brain had a fundamental feature that looked on the surface like a flaw. It paid significantly more attention to negative information than positive information. A bad experience stuck longer than a good one. A potential threat captured focus more completely than an opportunity. A suspicious sound in the dark demanded more mental resources than a beautiful sunset. And this was not an accident or a design error. It was a precise and deliberate outcome of hundreds of thousands of years of survival pressure. Ancient humans lived in an environment where the cost of missing a threat was death, and the cost of missing an opportunity was merely a missed meal. If a hunter heard a rustle in the tall grass and assumed it was wind, and it turned out to be a leopard, that hunter did not survive to pass on their genes. If they heard the same rustle and assumed leopard, and it turned out to be wind, they lost nothing but a few seconds of calm. Over hundreds of thousands of generations, the humans who survived were disproportionately the ones whose brains defaulted to the worst-case interpretation of ambiguous information. The optimists got eaten at a higher rate than the pessimists. The catastrophizers left more children. And so the brain that emerged from that process was a brain exquisitely tuned to find danger in uncertainty, to anticipate threats before they materialized, to treat ambiguous information as potentially deadly until proven otherwise. Ancient hunters operating under this system were not simply being cautious. They were running a risk assessment algorithm refined over tens of thousands of generations of trial and error, calibrated to the exact threat profile of the environment they lived in. Researchers studying the cognitive patterns of modern hunter-gatherer communities have found that this threat-first processing style translates into an extraordinary ability to read environmental signals, animal behavior, weather patterns, terrain changes, that most modern humans would not even consciously register. The negativity bias was not a weakness. It was the sharpest edge on the ancient human's psychological toolkit. Trick number 2, social threat detection, or the system that made ancient humans better at reading other people than almost anything else they did. For 300,000 years, being cast out of your group was not a social inconvenience. It was a death sentence. A single human, alone on the African savanna, with no tools they did not carry, no shelter they had not built, and no fire they had not kept alive, lasted days at best. The group was not optional. The group was survival itself. And because the group was survival, the social dynamics within it carried life and death stakes that demanded a level of interpersonal attunement that is genuinely difficult to overstate. Ancient humans needed to know who was loyal and who was building alliances against them. They needed to track whose status was rising and whose was falling. They needed to sense whether the mood of the group was shifting in dangerous directions before that shift became a formal decision. They needed to read the difference between a friendly negotiation and a prelude to conflict in a neighboring group's body language before either side had said a hostile word. These were not social observations made out of curiosity. They were survival assessments made under genuine pressure, and the consequences of getting them wrong were severe. The brain responded to this pressure the way it always responds to sustained and consequential demands. It built better hardware. Researchers studying the social cognition of modern hunter-gatherer groups have found levels of interpersonal attunement that are remarkable by any standard. An ability to read microexpressions, shifts in vocal tone, changes in posture and movement, and subtle disruptions in group energy, with a speed and accuracy that trained psychologists studying the same signals under laboratory conditions struggle to match. One researcher studying conflict resolution in hunter-gatherer communities noted that group members often identified and began diffusing interpersonal tension before the individuals involved were consciously aware that they were in conflict. The social threat detection system that ancient humans developed was not just sensitive, it was extraordinarily precise, calibrated through generations of high-stakes social navigation to pick up signals that most modern people have lost the ability to perceive at all. Trick number 3, mental mapping, or how ancient humans memorized more usable information than any modern storage system they could have imagined. Before writing, before maps, before any external information storage existed, the human brain was the only place knowledge could live. And the knowledge that ancient humans needed to hold was not abstract or theoretical. It was spatial, seasonal, relational, and constantly changing. A hunter-gatherer band moving through a home range of 200 to 1,200 square miles needed to carry a complete and constantly updated mental map of everything relevant to their survival across that entire territory. Every reliable water hole and which ones dried up in which month of the dry season. Every fruiting tree and when it came into harvest and how long the fruit lasted before it spoiled. Every predator denning site and the seasonal patterns of movement of the animals that used it. Every route through every terrain type and which ones became impassable after heavy rain. The location of every neighboring group's camp and the current state of the diplomatic relationship with each of them. All of this held in memory, updated in real time, shared across the group through conversation and storytelling, and passed to the next generation without a single word written down. Researchers studying the environmental knowledge of modern hunter-gatherer communities have consistently found cognitive maps of such density and precision that they resist easy comparison with anything produced by people living in cities. Studies of Aboriginal Australian trackers documented an ability to reconstruct the movements of animals from trails so faint they were invisible to trained field researchers, integrating microdisturbances in soil, vegetation, rock placement, and environmental context into a coherent and accurate narrative of movement that spanned hours and kilometers. Studies of the Inuit found navigational capabilities across featureless Arctic terrain in whiteout conditions that researchers initially refused to believe were possible without instruments. The Amazonian tribes studied by ethnobotanists carry pharmacological knowledge of thousands of plant species. Their properties, interactions, preparation methods, and appropriate uses, held entirely in living memory and oral tradition, representing a database of biological information that took Western science centuries of institutional effort to begin to document. The ancient human brain was not a primitive version of a modern mind struggling to hold information without the tools that make information holding easy. It was a sophisticated information processing system, operating at a level of memory, recall, and environmental integration that modern humans, operating in environments that externalize almost all storage, have largely lost access to. Trick number 4, story as survival technology, or how ancient humans invented the most powerful knowledge transfer system in human history. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published research from years spent recording conversations among the Jew/Hawansi Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last groups on Earth still living something close to the original human lifestyle. What she found changed the way researchers think about the function of human storytelling. During the day, roughly 80% of conversations among the Jew-Hawansi were practical: logistics, resource management, complaints about allocation, social negotiation. The daytime conversation of a hunter-gatherer group, it turned out, sounded a lot like a workplace. But at night, around the fire, the character of conversation shifted, completely and consistently. 81% of nighttime conversation was storytelling. Myths about the origins of the world and the forces that shaped it. Tales of people in distant places doing extraordinary things. Moral stories about what happened to members of past groups who broke the rules that held the community together. Jokes that made the whole camp laugh at the same thing at the same time. And Wiesner's central argument was that this was not entertainment in any trivial sense. It was a technology, and an extraordinarily sophisticated one. A story about what happened to the last group that tried to cross the flooded river during the rainy season carries survival information across generations without anyone having to experience the danger directly. A narrative about why a particular plant found near water is deadly encodes botanical knowledge in a format that human memory can hold for centuries without the information degrading. A moral tale about the fate of a group member who repeatedly took more than their share maintains social cohesion and behavioral norms more efficiently than any explicit rule system ever could. The reason this works so well is that the human brain is not designed to learn optimally from facts presented in isolation. It is designed to learn from narrative, from character, from the causal chain of action and consequence, from the emotional texture of a story that binds information to feeling and makes it genuinely difficult to forget. Researchers studying memory formation have repeatedly found that information delivered in story form is retained longer, recalled more accurately, and transferred more reliably to new situations than the same information delivered as a list or a set of instructions. Ancient humans were not telling stories around the fire because they had run out of other things to do. They were running the most sophisticated knowledge transfer system that had ever existed. And the fact that it was also enjoyable was not a coincidence. The enjoyment was what made it stick. Trick number 5. Mental time travel, or the cognitive ability that gave ancient humans an edge that no other species on the planet had ever possessed. Almost every other animal lives primarily in the present. It responds to what is happening now, the threat in front of it, the food within reach, the social situation currently unfolding. The ability to mentally project yourself forward into a future that has not happened yet, to run detailed simulations of scenarios that do not yet exist, and to plan responses to outcomes that are still only possibilities. This is one of the most distinctly and powerfully human cognitive abilities that evolution has ever produced, and ancient humans used it constantly and deliberately as a survival tool. When a group of hunters sat around a fire the night before a major hunt, they were not simply resting. They were running mental simulations of the hunt itself, the terrain, the likely behavior of the animal, the positions of each hunter, the contingencies if the wind changed or the animal broke in an unexpected direction. When a group leader assessed the approach of a neighboring band, they were mentally simulating the most likely intentions behind the visit, the possible responses to different opening postures, the risks of various outcomes. When a band considered moving their camp, the decision involved mentally projecting forward into the conditions of different locations across different seasons, weighing resources, risks, and travel costs that would not materialize for weeks or months. Researchers studying the evolution of the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain most associated with planning, future simulation, and consequence evaluation, have argued that the outsized development of this region in humans compared to other primates is directly connected to the demands of exactly this kind of complex forward planning in a high-stakes social and physical environment. The capacity for mental time travel that allowed ancient humans to simulate a hunt, plan a migration, or anticipate the behavior of a rival group was not an accidental byproduct of general intelligence. It was a specific cognitive tool, refined over hundreds of thousands of years of selection pressure, that gave the humans who possessed it in the greatest degree a decisive survival advantage over those who did not. Trick number 6. Emotional reset, or the psychological discipline that allowed ancient humans to keep functioning through conditions that would overwhelm almost any modern person. Life for an ancient human involved a frequency and severity of loss that is genuinely difficult to fully appreciate from the vantage point of modern life. People died young and often. Infant mortality was high. Group members were lost to predators, to accidents, to infections that would be trivially treatable today, and to conflicts with other groups. The environment itself was continuously and indifferently hostile. Droughts came without warning and lasted longer than plans had accounted for. Hunts failed. Camps had to be abandoned. And through all of it, the group had to keep functioning, had to hunt, move, navigate, plan, maintain social cohesion, and make consequential decisions under conditions of genuine, ongoing stress and loss. The anthropological record of modern hunter-gatherer communities suggests something that initially seems counterintuitive: that chronic, long-term, low-grade psychological distress is significantly less common in these populations than in industrialized ones, despite the objective difficulty of the lives involved. Researchers have proposed various explanations, but one of the most compelling involves the structure of emotional processing that high-demand environments impose. In a hunter-gatherer group, loss is experienced fully and communally. The grief is not suppressed, it is expressed, held by the group collectively, processed through ritual and shared acknowledgement, and then integrated. Not because the loss matters less, but because the environment does not allow indefinite suspension of function. The herd moves on a schedule that does not accommodate extended individual withdrawal. The needs of the group continue regardless of the emotional state of any individual member. The result is a pattern of emotional processing that is intense but time-bounded, deep when it needs to be deep, and then, because survival demands it, done. Researchers studying emotional regulation across cultures have found that the capacity for rapid emotional processing and reset, under conditions where it is genuinely required, is not fundamentally different between populations. What differs is the environmental pressure that activates it. Ancient humans were not emotionally stronger than modern humans in any simple biological sense. They were operating in conditions that demanded emotional processing at a speed and completeness that most modern environments simply do not require. 6 tricks, 6 systems. And when you lay them out together, what emerges is not the picture of a primitive creature stumbling through a dangerous world by luck and muscle. What emerges is the picture of a mind that was sophisticated, adaptive, socially intelligent, emotionally disciplined, and operating in full coordination with an extraordinarily demanding environment. The ancient human who scanned every rustle in the grass for danger, read every shift in the group's social dynamics, held hundreds of square miles of terrain in memory, transferred survival knowledge through stories that lasted generations, simulated futures that had not happened yet, and processed devastating loss and kept moving. That person was not less than a modern human. In the specific domains that their world required, they were operating at a level that most modern humans, with all of our technology and institutions and accumulated knowledge, genuinely cannot replicate. The ancient human mind was not a rough draft of the modern one. It was a finished product, built for a world that no longer exists, running psychological systems that took hundreds of thousands of years to perfect.